I don't live in a huge city. I don't live in a huge metropolitan area. And there's only so many providers that do trans medicine here. And when I went to my endocrinologist, she said that she had two other patients that were detransitioned as well.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh, wow, like that. Here's one doctor in this relatively small space that also has other patients detransitioning. It has to be much higher than people think, because that's,
Mm-mm. And when this is something that we hear, like just in general, is like, of something that I heard, is that people would say, well, if the person detransitioned, it meant that they were never trans. What would you say? What would be your response to that?
Wait, could you say the question again?
When people would just say, like, for example, like, oh, if a person detransitioned, it means that that person never been trans. What would would your response be to that?
My response would be, okay, what does it mean to be trans?
Yeah.
I mean, it's circular reasoning, kind of like, it's like, do you have to have dysphoria to be trans? Is that what makes you trans, having dysphoria about your gender? Well, then technically I'm still trans. And technically a whole bunch of people are trans.
Mm.
Or do you have to transition? Do you have to transition to be trans? Therefore, I was trans because I transitioned. Or is it that transition didn't work for me, which is when I hear, if transition doesn't work for you, you weren't trans. Well, that doesn't make any sense either, because could it be that maybe one treatment isn't going to help everybody? I mean, that's the case with all treatments, right? Even like take cancer, for example. There's not just one medicine or one treatment they give people. Different cancers and different people respond to different medications differently, and you have to know what works best for which person. And in mental health too, not everybody needs to go on antidepressants. Maybe some people would benefit from a certain type of counseling versus another type of counseling. There's like millions of different type of therapy out there.
Yeah.
So why would one way fix the issue?
Yeah. And yeah, like there's a plural, like a vaster. There's not only, like I said, not only one solution. There are many. And to you, which definition would you give to being transgender?
Sorry, what?
What would your definition be of being transgender?
Well, I don't think that transgender is really a thing at all. However, if I was to give a definition of a transgender person, I would say someone who transitioned medically.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would stick by my original thought on it, is that they had gender dysphoria so severe that they felt like they had to take medical intervention to make them feel more comfortable with their body.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And if what advice or recommendation would you have liked to hear or have had before you started transitioning?
I really wish I would have had a therapist that explored my history, explored my abuse, my homophobia, and the reality of my lived experience as a butch lesbian. And I would have liked a therapist that explored alternative ways for me to integrate with my body and to make peace with my body, and to see if it could have been handled without medical intervention. Because medical intervention is very severe, it's permanent, and I think if we were to keep medical intervention as a treatment for gender dysphoria, then it needs to be a last resort, not a first resort. It needs to be a last resort after someone has maybe had to do the therapy and has tried alternative treatments, you know. Personally, I don't think it should be a treatment at all, but that Pandora's box is open. So people will probably always think that it is a treatment. also wish I really would have heard the other side of the story from trans ideology. You know, I wish I would have heard the radical feminist and the very women-centered side of things. I think it would have really helped to balance out my perspective and think about things a little bit more deeply. I don't think any harm comes from understanding things from two different extremes. Neither extreme in my experience, usually two extremes are not the correct answer. It's often somewhere in the middle. And so when you get to extremes, you often can go, okay, let me figure out what's kind of happening here. But I think more perspective is never a bad thing.
Yeah. And then, like, what now with everything? What is your retrospection now?
My what?
Retrospection.
Like looking back on it?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Looking back on it now, I can sum it up as like are you asking how I feel about the whole thing just looking back on it now overall?
Yes.
That's a hard one. Still regret. I'll always have regret. But I also realize that I have done tremendous amount of growing through it and have come to a much better place at the end, kind of like a rebirth out of fire. So it is what it is. You can't take it back. So I think I'm glad I learned some really valuable lessons from it, and I hope that I can like make a difference and make the world a little bit better place for other people who struggle with it, especially women and especially butch lesbians, because I think with this whole conversation, I think we're often a very lost portion of it. You know, everybody talks about the kids, which obviously you should. Kids are such a vulnerable population, but in my experience, massive amounts of butch lesbians have transitioned of all ages. I mean, it ranges from young to in their 50s. You can't even find a woman who is a butch lesbian or even identifies as just a lesbian or a butch lesbian in popular media at all. Writers, you know, people in movies, musicians, whatever. They've all transitioned or they've all identified as non-binary or something like that. And that's something you have to look at and wonder why.
And then, like, it's like then I have a question more about just the sociological part, but what I'd like to know, but what were your parents doing for a living?
My dad was a auctioneer.
Sorry, a what?
An auctioneer.
Sorry, I don't know that word.
You know what an auctioneer is? It's the guy who, at a sale that is selling like cattle, will call out the prices for the cattle so people can bet on make.
Yeah, I know what it is.
You know, like an auction, like they do it for art and different things.
Yeah.
So he was an auctioneer. He was the guy that called out the prices and stuff.
Yeah.
He also was a cattle rancher. He raised cows and horses.
Okay.
But he did die when I was 18 months old, so he wasn't around for very long. He died in an accident. My mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mother until about I was 10, and then she went to work at the prison. So she was a prison guard.
Okay. Of women's section. Of the women's section.
She worked at a women's prison, yes. Although in California, women can work at men's prisons too. Okay. But she did work at a women's prison.
Right. And
so I guess my background is just middle class. It's that. Yeah. No one's rich in my family.
And and yeah, for which reason did you at the end accept to do the interview?
Why did I accept doing the interview?
Yeah.
I think it's the same reason I accept doing all of these. It's because I want I want things to change. I want people to get better care and better help. And I think the way you do this is to talk about your experiences and to kind of raise awareness around it. That there are some of this, and actually I think a good portion of us who were harmed by this idea that transition is the best or only answer for people with gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
Because many of us discovered that transitioning didn't really solve it. For me, it didn't solve it. It masked it. It bandaged it. It made it feel a little better, but it didn't really address it. So it was still there.
Yeah, like you said, like putting just like a desk and just pretending it's fine, but at the end, the things under the desk are still there.
It's still there. Yeah, it's still there. So, and you know what? I honestly can't speak for other people. Like, I don't know what's up in other people's brains, but I know what's in mine. And I've heard many of my detrans friends and people I've talked to say the same thing, that they did have dysphoria. It didn't help their dysphoria. And now they have bodies that are altered and no one to help because many of them still have dysphoria. And you can't find therapists who will actually recognize that it was damaging to us and work with us. It's really hard to find help out there. So that's why I do these.
Yeah. And it's like just giving a voice to what's going on.
Yeah. And I mean I do them because I feel like I can and so many detransitioners can't.
Yeah.
I'm older. I don't have anything to lose by being recognized as a detransitioner. I'm not going to lose a job if I don't have a job. I feel like mentally I have good family support. Mentally I'm well put together now, so I can speak on these things. Yeah. But so many of us are really damaged and traumatized. We're traumatized beforehand. Yeah. Then we're just re-traumatized and more traumatized through the process. Yeah. So now, it's really hard you can't be an activist and speak out on these things when you're trying to heal from trauma.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Many of us can't speak.
And as a last question, I prepared these questions that I wanted to ask, but I haven't been through that. So is there anything you're like, well, you forgot to ask this, and this is something is actually important that I still want to share, or I think I would like to share?
No, I think you did a very good job in your questions. I think you covered everything. I can't think of anything to add.
Okay, great. Then I'm gonna stop the recording if it's okay.
Okay.